Motor vehicle safety, reducing accidents in teenage drivers. Graduated driver licensing programs are a public health intervention that started to be implemented on a state-by-state level in the 1990s. Graduated driver licensing, also known as GDL, programs enforce restrictions on novice drivers to transition them through the learning process while maintaining their safety. Although aspects of the graduated driver licensing program vary from state to state, they generally include limitations on age, hours of experience, nighttime driving, and presence of underage passengers. Less common interventions also include zero tolerance of underage drinking and restrictions on cell phone use. The targeted population of the graduated driver licensing program is teenagers, generally between the ages of 15 and 20. According to the CDC, motor fatalities are the leading cause of death for individuals in this group. For every mile traveled, a 16-year-old driver is 3 times more likely to be in a fatal motor vehicle accident than an older driver is. The goal of the graduated driver licensing program was to reduce teenage fatalities from motor vehicle accidents. By implementing these programs, states would be able to decrease the injury and fatality rates of accidents in their state, as well as decrease overall cost. In a study of the effects of GDL initiation in New York State, the rate of injured teen drivers decreased by 31%. In the state of Massachusetts, an estimated $25 million was saved in the first 5 years after their enactment of graduated driver licensing laws. Are graduated driver licensing programs effective in decreasing motor vehicle fatality and injury rates? Fortunately, this is a public health intervention that has been well researched and proven to be highly effective both in terms of cost savings and in the saving of lives. One of the biggest social factors affecting interventions among youth is the cognitive changes that naturally occur at this stage of life. Teenagers are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior than other groups are, and are less likely to believe that a negative consequence of a behavior would affect them. They also value the opinions of their peers more than the opinions of adult influences, making it more difficult to engage with them on an individual level. One of the benefits of the graduated driver licensing program is that it will, by nature, also involve the families of teen drivers. By restricting passengers or reducing nighttime drivers, families can be more involved in the adherence of the law and become aware of what behaviors put teens most at risk. Public policy plays a significant role in influencing teenage drivers to exhibit safe behavior. By enforcing the restrictions of graduated driver licensing, such as ticketing or license removal due to nighttime driving or carrying extra passengers, teens are more likely to comply with the rules of their community. When graduated driver licensing laws are implemented in the United States, it is done so by each state individually, and the state determines which components of the law it wishes to enact. Because it takes place over the entirety of the state as a blanket law, it affects all populations within that state, whether they are rural or agricultural, and regardless of ethnicity and sex. However, it is worth considering that there are socioeconomic factors that play a role in when a teenager learns to drive. If a family is experiencing financial hardship, or if a parent has less time to provide their child with the number of supervised hours required for a license, it can delay a teen from getting a license until after the age of 18, at which point they would not benefit from graduated driver licensing laws. This has been shown to disproportionately affect people of color. One way in which the graduated driver licensing laws eased some of these hardships was to implement a sibling exemption for passenger restrictions, allowing a driver to carry underage passengers if the passenger is a brother or sister. As time goes on, more studies are being completed to look in depth at the success of graduated licensing laws, including stratifying the data by gender, racial background, socioeconomic status, and other traits. With increased understanding, changes can be made to hopefully make this equally effective for all teenagers. Prior to implementation of graduated driver licensing laws, motor vehicle fatalities for teenagers exceeded 6,000 deaths per year. In 2015, The total number of deaths was just over 2,700. Loss of life due to teenage crash fatalities was tragic for communities who lost individuals at the prime of their life. By implementing new policies and enforcing them on a statewide basis, thousands of lives have presumably been saved by graduated driver licensing programs. Although it is difficult to ascertain a direct history of graduated driver licensing programs, one of the earliest programs to be introduced was a federal program in New Zealand. Shortly thereafter, various states in the United States began to adopt different aspects of graduated driver licensing programs, helped in part by recommendations from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, or IIHS, and Highway Loss Data Institute, HLDI. The IIHS is an independent nonprofit initially formed by the several major automobile insurance companies, and HLDI is a research body that supports the IIHS. Together, members of the automobile insurance industry and state governments passed legislation in favor of GDL programs with the goal of reducing accidents and fatalities for teenage drivers. The external stakeholders of GDL programs are members of the automobile insurance industry who benefit from fewer claims related to automobile accidents, and state governments who act in the interest of their constituents to reduce fatalities in their population. Both of these parties stand to gain cost savings as a result of reduced teenage fatalities. Although the economic cost varies widely from state to state, in part due to differences in population, the cost nationwide of motor vehicle collisions is $44 billion a year, with a quarter of that number due specifically to motor vehicle crash costs for individuals aged 15 to 19. The community resources involved with the GDL program were primarily pre-existing local government agencies. The Department of Licensing and Department of Motor Vehicles updated their policies and programs to reflect the most recent changes in legislature. School-based driver's ed programs acted accordingly. Local law enforcement had the responsibility of enforcing these laws, and county district courts were tasked with determining an appropriate response if the laws were broken. Implementation and funding for GDL varies from state to state. In theory, the legislation itself should result in cost savings and therefore more than pay for itself. However, to initially fund the project, each state must budget its own expenses. Because state governments are funded by taxpayer dollars, this is usually in the form of public health spending from a state budget. Some states may also have qualified to receive grants from the federal government if their GDL laws met basic requirements. In attempting to gain the support for this community public health intervention, there are two essential groups to consider: teenagers and their parents. Due to key age-related differences between the two groups, it would be important to target these two populations separately. It is important to educate the public about the benefits of this intervention early on to reduce the likelihood of misconceptions or immediate negative reaction to the intervention. One fairly effective way to distribute this information to parents would be through mass media, such as contacting TV stations and newspapers, who could then run a story on it. If there was enough funding, one could use advertising via social media or television, which would likely be a better way to gain the attention for teenagers. Utilizing the existing community resource of DMVs, having pamphlets explaining the new law and purpose thereof would be helpful for individuals who would like more detailed information. Because DMVs are run by the state, educating and testing teens on the new requirements could be part of the currently existing driver's education course. For parents, it would be important to present the intervention as a way to keep teens safe. Parent buy-in is essential, as they are often one of the first people in a teen's life to enforce the rules of GDL. Because parents are adults, they may appreciate having more information available to them. Programs such as Michigan's Checkpoints program provide parents with key information about the law, as well as how to enforce safe behavior in their teen. Tennessee implemented a similar program, the Novice Driver Safety Project, in which information was mailed to parents. Research shows that interventions like these might help maintain teen compliance with GDL interventions, but the stronger evidence was for increased parental support of the program. For teens, it is important to present the information in a way that is relatable to them. One way to do this is through a victim panel in which students have the opportunity to meet actual victims of car crashes. At a high school in Bellevue, Washington, a mock car crash was set up, with actual students from the school playing various roles of the crash. Students stated they would never forget the impact of actually seeing some of their friends as victims or initiators of a motor vehicle accident. A real-life experience like that can be far more moving than any statistic, particularly in the eyes of a teenager. As with many public health interventions, the introduction of GDL licensing can bring up many ethical concerns. GDL licensing targets a specific population, generally teenagers aged 15 to 19 years old. For many states, this has presented a problem in the implementation and enforcement of GDL laws. Police officers may not be able to identify the age of a driver. Additionally, teenage drivers may essentially be profiled when police officers are attempting to ascertain if the driver is breaking laws implemented under GDL. In New Jersey, an attempt to remedy this problem was initiated when the state mandated that underage drivers have decals on their cars that identify the driver's underage status. This generated strong opposition from teenagers and parents who felt this was an example of profiling and an impingement of civil liberty. Additionally, there was concern that it could make teenage drivers a target of undesirable attention from other parties. However, the state has maintained this requirement in an attempt to improve the state's statistics of teenage fatalities and effectively enforce the GDL program. This is an example of a public health intervention that may restrict an individual's rights for the improvement of the common good. Many studies have been done to determine the attitude of both parents and students in anticipation and response to implementation of GDL laws. The response from parents was generally positive, particularly as the program continued in duration. Support was less strong among teenagers, generally reported as a dislike of the passenger restriction. However, the majority of teenagers still responded positively to the intervention. Of parents who opposed the law, much of the opposition was attributed to the parental requirement of a certain number of hours driving with a new teenage driver, as this places a new burden on parents. Interestingly, a New Zealand study found that teenagers who oppose GDL law are more likely to be involved in a crash than teenagers who are not, indicating a potentially riskier subset population. Despite overall support of GDL laws, there have been many individuals and groups who question its ethics and efficacy. The National Youth Rights Association is an example of an opponent to the law, citing concerns about the stigmatization of young drivers, the singling out of young drivers as opposed to any new drivers, an impingement on the civil liberties of teenagers, and questioning if the GDL laws are as effective as reported. There are many social factors contributing to the desire for GDL programs in the United States. In 1987, New Zealand gained success with their implementation of GDL laws and inspired other places such as the United States to do so as well. A few states in the United States followed suit, and early studies from these states showed reduction in teen fatalities, as well as strong parental support for these programs. A public opinion poll in 2011 demonstrated significant support for GDL from adults aged 18 and older. Advocacy groups such as Mothers Against Driving also supported implementation of the laws. As more research supported GDL implementation was published, more and more states put GDL programs into action. Teen drivers were identified by public health agencies as a population disproportionately in need of an intervention, and the fatality rates before and after each state initiated GDL were well documented, thereby increasing general public support for GDL programs. The driving economic factor that promoted a need for GDL intervention was the stunning cost of motor vehicle fatalities and the identification of teenage drivers having a disproportionate number of costly accidents. According to the CDC, only 7% of the population is aged 15 to 19 years old. Yet this age group accounts for 11% of the cost, equating to a total cost of $11 billion annually. It is also important to remember that although the initial costs of accident, fatality, or injury are expensive, there is an associated lifetime cost of lost productivity when teenagers die or become severely debilitated because of an accident. The bulk cost of these accidents is paid for not by the driver, but by others in society. National Highway Traffic Association studies have shown that 75% of the cost is paid for in the form of taxes, insurance, and other related costs. In 2007, Baker and al. Published a study indicating that comprehensive GDL programs, those that incorporate most of the recommendations by the federal government, are estimated to reduce teenage fatality crashes by 38% and reduce non-fatal injuries by 40%. This could mean a national cost savings of approximately $4.3 billion